on your computer.
Yes.
Yes, that's it. Go to the volume on your computer.
Good
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah, there's nothing I could do for her. It's on her
No, it's
end.
her. It's her. Did you text her that?
Yes, I did.
Okay, cool.
Volume.
But she's got to know how to do that. Thanks, got it. Margaret, can you hear us now? Raise your hand if you can. Yeah, there's
Hey.
Margaret.
Hey, hi, Margaret.
Hi, Margaret.
Hi, Margaret.
Oh, that's good.
Good.
Okay, and Father, now Christopher is now the host and he's recording this. So you can
One
go
can
as
only
long as you
hope.
want. You can go as long as you want.
No, we're not gonna. We
Oh,
know that they have a lot of things they want to do in Boulder.
okay.
Mhm.
Hey, Father Terry, is this going to be a two-part presentation on Howard Thurman or just one?
It's looking like two.
Okay,
Good.
great.
Great.
I just wanted
Because
to make
because
sure
I
to
have
announce that.
I have too many asides, as they say,
Well, and
which you all like because you like the gossip.
Yes.
Absolutely.
he's so wonderful. I'm so glad you're going to do more information about him. I just read Jesus and the Disinherited. It's absolutely beautiful.
Mhm.
And it changed my whole perspective. It's just wonderful. So we're excited. I'm excited.
Yeah.
Well, he did a lot of formal study as well, and I'll get into this when we begin. He did a lot of formal study as well. He went to good schools, but and he started out as a Baptist minister in some Midwestern town, and it could have just gone on like that the rest of his life. But then he kept studying, and he did something very practical. And then he was invited to teach even more, and one thing leads to another. So the guy was forever
It's beautiful.
expanding, if you will, for quite some time, which is one of the things that fascinated me about him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, and yeah, I think he has 3 or 4 books out. So you read that particular one. Okay. So
We've got
is
just a
there
couple more minutes.
Yeah, see if we get any more people up to 21 and so on and so forth. We are getting a goodly number of people who are tuning in to the recordings
Good.
because, well, first of all, the recordings are better than they used to be because we're just better at doing it. You're better at doing it technically. And
Christopher's better at doing it. I couldn't pull it off, but we have Christopher.
yeah, he's good.
Thanks be to God.
He's good at doing it. And as people get their shots, they're getting out and doing more things on Saturday mornings.
Yeah.
Whereas used to be, they had nothing else to do. We get 80 or 90 people looking at this thing. So, but people are checking in later. And when they get out and do a lot of stuff and then get COVID, they'll be back home and they'll be watching live. So I heard that it's pretty safe to fly, travel, as they say. I says, yeah, well, good. I'll let the first 10,000 people travel and see what happens before I'm going anywhere. I really don't want to go anywhere. So what the heck?
Well, the CDC says now that you can travel in the contiguous United States without having to have any kind of COVID test or isolating yourself or quarantining yourself now if you are vaccinated. But you have to, I think you have to show proof of vaccination.
Yeah, well, we all have our cards. I mean,
Yeah.
I got a card when I got vaccinated.
That's
Yeah.
what you have to show. Yeah.
Just laminate it or duplicate it and throw it in your purse or bag and take that around. But I'm still not going to do it.
I'll tell you what, it's 10:30. So why don't we go ahead and get started? I'll do my usual introduction. Hi, my name's David Waite. This is the Knoxville, Tennessee Seekers of Silence program for Saturday, April 3rd, 2021. Our guest speaker this week is Father Terry Ryan, as it often is. I'm just the technical host. This morning, I've got a co-host, Christopher. for technical reasons. But at any event, I always like to go over a few technical things before we begin. I'm going to ask everybody to please shut off your cameras and to please mute your microphones. We mute our microphones so we don't have any background noise that bothers us while Father Terry is speaking, so we can hear what he has to say. And we shut off our cameras because it saves an awful lot of bandwidth, because this is a Zoom meeting. It makes the meeting much more stable. And with that, Teresa, you usually introduce Father Ryan, and so I'll turn it over to you. Okay.
All right, well, I think we all know Father Ryan now. He's a smart aleck. He's an awesome priest and he's been a priest for a long time. And I don't want to say how long. And I do want to clarify that we know he's from the Bronx and not Brooklyn. I know that. And he's going to speak about Howard Thurman, and I can't wait to hear from him. I'm sure all of us are, because he does such a beautiful job of explaining things and getting into the spirituality of whatever concept or subject he tackles. So let's just get right to it.
Well, good morning, everybody. It's 8:30 a.m. here in the mountains. And it's a beautiful day. I think we're having spring pretty consistently out here now. So that's very nice for some of us. Others would like winter to continue so that our ranch will have more snow on the ground. So we'll see what we'll see. But Howard Thurman was a most interesting person. And I had been talking previously about Rabbi Zalman Schachter. And Zalman Schachter actually met and was very influenced by Howard Thurman. But let's start out with a little bit of background of Howard. He was born in Daytona, Florida in 1899. It was a very racist area of the country in that era. His grandmother was a slave. Okay, yes. The public school system back then, because it didn't want the Black to be too educated, had no 8th grade for a Black child. So they could go through the 7th grade, but then they couldn't go to the 8th grade. And if they can't go to the 8th grade, they can go to high school. So it kept the high schools nicely segregated, and it kept the Black somewhat uneducated. But he was proactive, as was his family. And so he went to high school in Florida Baptist Academy, which was a private school for Blacks who understood the white public school system. So they would catch them up and then he'd go through high school. He was the valedictorian. So he was a bright person to start with, and aggressive about getting an education. And then he went on to Morehouse College, which many have heard of, pretty good school. That was it still is. It's in Atlanta, Georgia. And he was the valedictorian there. So then he's thinking of being a minister. Well, you go up north, and he went to Rochester Theological Seminary in New York, which, of course, being up north and being a minister, was mostly white. Matter of fact, there was only one other Black student in that school. So he finishes Rochester Theological Seminary, and he gets a job as a pastor of an Ohio Baptist church. And this is the mid-1920s, the roaring 20s. And he gets married, but his first wife, Kate Kelly, dies just 4 years later in 1930. She dies of tuberculosis. But meanwhile, he began postgraduate studies in scripture. So here he is, fellow valedictorian of the schools he goes to. And he becomes a pastor at Ohio Baptist Church, but he's not finished studying. He begins post-grad studies in scripture. So in 1929, now it's just been a minister a couple of years, he resigns as the pastor. He sees himself moving along, and we're going to get into his mystical life, which was what led him. This is just sort of the biographical stuff. So he resigns as a pastor, and he begins studies with a Quaker mystic, also Black, scholar and activist named Rufus Jones. We will study Rufus Jones later this year in sort of following this lineage, Rufus Jones. So he studies with him, and then he goes on to Morehouse, where he had been going to school. He goes on to Morehouse to teach. So now he's a teacher at a school he used to go to. He's connected to Rufus Jones. He's got graduate studies in scripture. And he marries again in 1932 to Sue Bailey, who was his wife for the rest of his life. And then he moves on to Howard University, which is in Washington, D.C., and he teaches Christian theology. So he's pretty well known in circles of Black ministry and Black schools. He also met Gandhi through all this. And he might have met him with Zalman Schachter, who met Gandhi. Now, he had some questions out of all this. And now we're going to start moving into his theological, mystical life. He had questions about church and race. Well, many people have questions about that. He sees, of course, that many of us do, that Jesus is inclusive. And if you read the scripture, you see that Jesus just kind of seems to include everybody. And he doesn't just include everybody, but let's stay separate. He includes everybody. And what Howard Thurman sees is what he calls, or we could call, Christian culture-dominated ways. In other words, Christianity is culture-dominated. Whatever the mores of your culture is, seems to impede upon your worship and your Christian life. Unlike Jesus, who was not controlled by his culture, which is one of the reasons he probably was crucified. This being Holy Saturday, in my tradition, he's dead and buried, and hopefully gone as far as a lot of people are concerned, because Jesus just wouldn't stay with the culture. And one of the things is because he was too darn inclusive. So we have Christian-dominated cultures, and you can see this nowadays probably in churches. People tend to go to churches in which they feel comfortable, and they feel comfortable because everybody seems to be like them or enough like them that they would go to this church. So someone says, I don't go to that church, it's too liberal. I don't go to that church, it's too conservative. I don't go to that church, or I do go to that church because their comfort zone, or whatever their cultural comfort zone is what they look for in their church. So probably if you move into a neighborhood that's mostly one skin color, whose primary language is the same, probably the local churches all look like that, and so on and so forth. So this was a big question for him, and he felt that we needed a spirituality that would break through that. And so what he did, though, is he did something very practical. He left Howard University, where he was teaching, and he moves in 1944. So he's at Howard for about 12 years, right into World War II, right through the Depression, and he moves to San Francisco, California, which back then was just being discovered. He goes there in 1944. One of the things that helped San Francisco to get discovered was World War II and fighting the Japanese. So we had to have bases on the West Coast. We had to have hospitals on the West Coast for the troops coming home and so on and so forth. So all these guys who were fighting the wars were sent out to a place called San Francisco, which was a base for them, and they would take off from there. So there was Navy ships, there was hospital, and so on and so forth. So San Francisco was getting discovered. And one of the things, the Paulist Fathers had a church in San Francisco, still do, called Old St. Mary's. I have a room there. And one of the things Old St. Mary's did during World War II is help young soldiers to be able to have a way to socialize, to meet other people, to meet young ladies, perhaps. And so San Francisco was having this explosion of at least temporary population because of World War II. Well, he goes out there in 1944. Well, the war is going on, and San Francisco is kind of a busy place. And the army is still pretty segregated. The military is still very segregated then. And he starts a church, which he thinks speaks to what he feels needs to happen. And it's called the Church for the Fellowship of All Peoples. It's interracial and it's intercultural. It was the first of its kind. And what he was trying to do with this church, and he was a very good preacher, which helped because he could then draw in all kinds of people. Now, remember, in my tradition, the Catholic Church, the Mass was in Latin, and there wasn't much preaching at all. So if people are interested in preaching, a guy like Howard Thurman was where you wanted to go. And of course, he wasn't going to hang on to just one denominational way of looking at things. He wanted something that overcame denominationalism, overcame the Reformation, fighting with one another, and get back to the gospel and the inclusiveness of Jesus. So he's trying to overcome culturally imposed walls. And he did this for 9 years, up to 1953. And then now he's getting pretty well known. In the Boston University, not Boston College, the Catholic one, Boston University is interested in this model and in teaching this model. In other words, religion is important in university education, in a secular university, if it's expansive. So they call on him, and so he teaches 10 years there, 1953 to 63. He teaches this model of a way of being, and it's at Boston University that Zalman Schachter meets him, and Zalman realizes that even his Judaism, his Orthodox Judaism, he's an Orthodox Jew, we had talked about him, was just too narrow. It needed to be expansive. And then he began to look beyond just expansive Judaism to what are the paths of various religions that can meet, so we stop killing one another. So Howard Thurman does this for 10 years. 1963, Boston University, he moves back to San Francisco in 1965. And I came to San Francisco in 1969, and I heard Howard Thurman, but I was too stupid to go listen to him. But he was out there, and he was preaching. He wrote several books, which you can look up on Zoom. Any one of them are very good. His themes now, okay. His themes, what was it that got him moving in the direction of this expansive way of looking at things? What moved him out of a narrow Black Baptist mentality that was the church that he started out with? What got him moving out was the mystical. One of his major themes was that you had to have a religious experience. That's what Zalman Schachter said, the same thing. Many people who are, and I'll get into what mystical is, but he says you've got to have a religious experience deep enough that it begins to shatter the cultural way that you were brought up, the cultural way that narrows your vision of God and of people and of your world, and that makes for separation, competition in the worst sense of the word, and ultimately war. So we felt that you needed to have a religious experience. You can't just be going to church where it's safe, try to make a deal with God for your afterlife situation, getting rid of guilt. You've got to have something deeper, and not just a religious experience in which your imagination is moved or your mind is moved, something that goes deeper. And he says, that's when you discover something about yourself that you didn't know before, something deeper that cannot be fed by cultural comfort zones, such as your neighborhood or your economics or your skin color or whatever it is, ethnicities. So what he said, which was quite challenging and could be challenging to us, is that Christianity, well, I'll preface this. He says, we have an obsession with certainty. We're obsessed with it. Not just that we'd like to feel we're in the right place, but we're so obsessed with that anybody who isn't in our place is dead wrong. And maybe being dead wouldn't be a bad idea for them. Or as we might say, they don't matter if they don't agree with me. What he says, based on this obsession that we have with being certain, which I think comes from fear, he said, is Christianity is a particular expression of, but not a universal expression of religion. Well, this would get him in a lot of trouble with the Catholic Church. It would get me in a lot of trouble with the Catholic Church. I mean, get up in the pulpit and says, we're a particular expression, but we're not all. Because, this cultural thing gets in the way sometime of evangelization, in which you don't go out and share your religious experience. You go out and try to make people just like you, telling them, because then you'd be right. And if you're not like me, you're dead wrong, and you're going to burn. So he says it's particular expression, but not a universal. It's not a universal expression of religion. And Jesus is not the only way to God. Well, I guess when he met Gandhi, that would help. Jesus is not the only way to God, but he is a way to God. And if Jesus was inclusive, then would he not have had something to say to everybody? So what happens is that Jesus is inclusive, including all, but when you institutionalized him, you narrowed it down to where what he's saying is not for everybody. Or what he's saying is for everybody if you agree with the institution, which is not the same as agreeing with Jesus, is kind of what he's saying. But Christian, being a Christian is not superior to other religions. So try to keep this in mind. It's not superior to other religions, but your experience, if it's a deep religious experience and it's expressed through a particular religion, is important to share with other people, not to make them join you or agree with you. That is up to God, up to the divine, up to the ultimate reality, as Thomas Keating would say. So, but since we have an obsession with certainty, we don't like differences. It makes us uncomfortable. We don't like it in our religion. We don't like it in skin color. And we sure don't like it in politics today. Differences are lethal. So, what is his solution? He said, you need a total surrender to God. If you make a total surrender to God, I guarantee you'll have some religious experiences. That's trust. And to have a total surrender to God is the contemplative path. And so that's what makes him a mystic. To have a more intense religious experience than simply a faith in a dogma or in a church. It's an intense religious experience that expands our narrowness and moves us into oneness. Jesus was about all in all. Denominational churches tend to move into separation and differences and saying who's in and who's out. So he says you really have to have a deeper prayer life than words and thoughts. Now, having said that, it's important to feed the mind and the imagination with something of your experience with God. What I find sometimes is that what people do is they say, well, I sit for the half hour a day in the morning and I do my meditation. And then they go about the rest of their day without much reference to that at all. And so that half hour a day may very often make them feel comfortable, make them feel good, make them feel at peace. But it doesn't seem to have enough connection with their thought processes or their imagination. And so what happens if we can't connect one to the other is we end up in fantasy life, or we end up with a lot of anxieties and worries. It's not that we can't have anxieties and worries, it's just that they dominate us. So what I find is important to be thinking and letting our imaginations move with the spiritual, which is why, for instance, I will read some spiritual literature. Right now I'm reading a couple of things. I'm reading The Cloud of Unknowing, but not by Johnston. I'm reading it by Carmen Aceveda Butcher. I recommend that translation. It's The Cloud of Unknowing. So I'm reading that they're very short chapters, like 2 pages. And so I read a little bit of that. And what I want to be able to do is to have my mind, even though it may float off into anxieties and worries or fantasies, it keeps coming back because I'm trying to connect my prayer life, my active, that sitting, with the rest of my day. So you do have to feed your thoughts and imagination. But when you're trying to practice a deeper prayer life, you don't pay attention to that for that half hour or hour a day. So mysticism is the answer, if you will. The contemplative life is the answer to breaking down the walls. And so you want to get beyond a kind of a lukewarm, safe commitment to God, in which you're in your comfort zone. So I'll give you an example of this. Boulder, Colorado, where I also live sometimes. Boulder, Colorado is considered a very safe place, and people like it. It has a comfort zone for a lot of people. It's a very white area. Very few blacks live there. There's a lot of Latinos moving in, but it's considered a very safe area. And a couple of weeks ago, a fellow, I think he was a Syrian, came and shot up one of the grocery stores and killed 10 people. And people are shocked. Well, yeah, of course they're shocked. It's a terrible thing. But one of the shocks comes from, this is happening in Boulder. This is a safe place to live. In other words, if you had read about that happening, if you were in Boulder and you read about it happening in, say, Harlem, you'd say, oh, well, it's Harlem. Forgetting that the people in Harlem might be just as shocked as you are in Boulder. So we have our comfort zones, and we get very upset when our comfort zones are discomforted, which happened in this shooting. Well, now back to the spiritual dimension. We like comfort zones in our churches, in our religion, in our beliefs, our mental, dogmatic belief system, who's in and who's out. And he says, you got to get beyond that. Your commitment to God has to be not safe, but edgy. And to do this, to get into this deeper prayer life that will begin to change you, you need discipline. In other words, you got to practice. It's sort of like you got to practice before you have much religious experience, so that you get yourself ready for this. And I think one of the things that gets you ready is a sense of unease with the way things are. I've met very few people that said they started practicing a more contemplative way of life because they were comfortable as things were or are. Now, you can have a certain amount of comfort. Doesn't have to be discomforting, but there's just a little bit of interior dis-ease, unease. Things just aren't right. You don't want a comfort zone that's mere escapism. I remember after I left where I grew up, which was New York City, White Plains, New York, and that I moved to Chicago, Illinois, and for my first real job. And this was in 1967, and I was, cultural Catholic. I had a very comfortable life in many ways. I had a beautiful apartment overlooking downtown skyscraper, as it was, of Chicago. But there was a discomfort someplace. There was just something wasn't. So all the comfort things that I had, the job that I had, which was a good job, nice apartment, so on and so forth, just wasn't enough. And I remember at one point deciding to become a big brother. I don't know, where you go and you help you are put in contact with a young person, the same sex, so it would be a young boy. And you were supposed to kind of mentor and help him along somehow. That was called Big Brother. I did it for a little while, but I was not mature enough in my spiritual search. It wasn't for me. And so then I think I stopped doing it. But it was an indication to me that I wasn't quite comfortable. And I remember asking people on the job, are you really happy doing this? And they would say yes. So I knew there was something not the matter with me, but something not fulfilled in me. And that was way back. It was 5 years before I even joined the Paulists. But that's what gets you starting to discipline yourself in prayer, is the dis-ease with your comfortable life, or your life as it is, cannot be met with your life as it is. And so, and you try to find other substitutes, as I did, but eventually it was a spiritual search that had to happen. And so that's what gets me on a daily basis, disciplining myself, is I can look around at some wonderful things that I have and say, but it's not deep enough. Or for me, it's not, there's something more. And I practice on a daily basis, even though some days I might be bored. So this is what Howard is saying, Howard Thurman. You've got to have a discipline. So if you've got a bit of a dis-ease in you, then that's going to make the discipline. And the discipline is what's going to begin to open you, because God is going to say, hey, this kid's really serious. I might show up in a deeper pattern than what he's been doing. So, and from that discipline, you get a relationship beginning to build. And that develops a deeper experience. And he says you have to have a deeper experience. And from that deeper experience, you make a commitment to change your life. Well, when I went in the Paulist Fathers, but here's one. Bill Wilson, one of the co-founders of Alcoholics Anonymous, had a very profound white light experience. And he had a lot of disease, and he was trying to satisfy it with booze. And it wasn't working. And he was in a sanitarium hospital. He was on the way out for sure. And he had this profound experience of what Thomas Keating calls ultimate reality. He called it God. And he made a commitment to try to do something, not only about his own alcoholism, but to help other people. This is one of the things that's going to happen. It's not a private experience that stays, it's a private experience, but it doesn't stay private. It always moves out to connection, because the religious experience of any depth builds towards oneness, breaks down separation, breaks down self-centeredness. And what happens, of course, is then you make a commitment, and then there's some suffering, because your commitment is, you have an idea how this is going to go, and it doesn't go that way. You got a lot of failures, and these failures can derail you. It seems on a daily basis, slogging along, it can get pretty tough. Your efforts don't see results. And as Bill Wilson said, well, results are not up to you. The effort is up to you. And when I gave my own example, when I went in the seminary, I was all fired up, and a lot of it's boring and tedious. And parish life can be kind of tedious as well. A lot of desk work and paperwork and stuff like that, and so on and so forth. And, you got 3 or 4 masses on a Sunday. You got to give the same homily. Man, it gets old. But if you've got a deep enough prayer life, you're able to get through all that. And up here now in the monastery, we start out at 4:30 in the morning with vigils. Well, I woke up to my alarm this morning. And I said, I don't want to get out of bed. I don't want to do this. So some days it's just showing up. That's what the discipline is sometimes. We talk about deep religious experiences. Some days you just show up because you've made a commitment. You've made a commitment to deepen your own prayer life. You made a commitment to expand your life to include others that you didn't include before. And some days it's just hard, but you do it, as people know in other areas of their life. So it moves to where suffering now becomes a choice. You've got a religious experience of some depth when suffering becomes a choice. I mean, in my tradition, we're celebrating the Triduum. Holy Thursday, Last Supper, this is my body, this is my blood, Jesus dying on the cross, getting buried, and so on. That's a lot of suffering. It was his choice. I used to avoid suffering, and booze was a great way to avoid suffering. And any other things I could find out. Just get out of it. I don't want to hurt at all. I don't want to be miserable. I don't want to put up with people I don't like. And a lot of times I'd like people after I had a few drinks. So, but when you get a deeper prayer life, there'll still be suffering, but you'll choose to accept it and you'll show up to it. And I think that's when there really is a difference. So it becomes a challenge to be loving. It's easy to be loving when you fall in love. But the challenge to be loving when people around you are not loving back, when you just don't have the psychic energy for it. But what it does, this challenge to be loving, this accepting suffering, notice how it moves you out of going to a church in which you feel comfortable, going to a service that's at a time that's comfortable for you. So it counters a lot of this cultural values and norms that we like. In other words, we're moving back to a lukewarm, safe religion. And Howard Thurman says, all this does is separate, divide, and cause problems. So the main problem, if you get into a deeper religious prayer life, is you're going to find the problem. I found I was the problem. There may be problems outside of me, but I got to work on me. And that's what's going to come out of it. So it's a challenge to love. It's a countercultural love. It's a love of oneness, not a love of differences. And believe me, this can upset your peer group. You try to change your ways, and the people that liked you because you were like them are going to get upset. And this can be a suffering that can derail us. It can be kind of a lonely experience. I'm sure when in Baptist circles, when Howard Thurman said Christianity is a particular expression, but not the universal expression of religion, and Jesus is not the only way to God, I bet a few people wanted to toss him out. So notice, nobody was hiring him later in his life to come to their church. He was either a teacher at a university or he was back at his own church that he started in San Francisco. You're not going to get hired by denominational churches or by the Catholic Church if you don't toe the line, which is why we have a lot of mediocrity, because religions as institutions are by nature mediocre. They may say the right words, but there's so much mediocrity there. At least that's been my experience. Although there are pockets of stuff that's not. And some people can get very, they say, I'm not mediocre, I'm fired up. Yeah, you're fired up to make everybody just like you, which is not fired up. You got to be fired up to make you the best you can be, that God wants you to be, and then share that with others and let God do the rest. So Jesus seems to have been a witness. Jesus witness. In other words, what's he talking about? Why is he doing all this talking to other people? Because of his personal encounter with God. He called Father, the ultimate reality. You can call it what you want. He was comfortable calling it Father. And he was a Nazareth Jew. You know, he was a small town Jew. And he was a carpenter. Talk about breaking out of a cultural way. I'm sure that disappointed and upset a lot of people, his own family for one. He's breaking out of what he was brought up to know because of his personal experience. In other words, you can't expect Nazareth Judaism to expand your spiritual life, because it can only go so far. It's a balloon that can only blow up so far. And Jesus, he popped that balloon. And he moves out of that carpentry. He doesn't get married, which was another cultural thing. Doesn't have family. And he's 30 years old, they think. And he finally goes out into the world. Well, he spent a lot of time working on Jesus and a lot of time working on that experience before he went out into the world, the larger world, his larger world, and began to talk about this God in ways that attracted people, but didn't attract everybody. So what Jesus had developed was direct knowledge of ultimate meaning, is what Howard Thurman called it. You have direct knowledge of ultimate meaning, or a one-on-one deep experience with God that changes how you see everything, because how you see everything was taught to you culturally. And so this is what gets changed in Jesus. And this is really what he shares. And it's all you can share with anybody else, is your experience. And hopefully it's deep enough. So he has this direct knowledge. That's what he calls God Father. He's my Father. And I have a close relationship with him. So what Howard Thurman calls, he says, Jesus had an experience of what he sensed he knew to be true. But it was a knowledge about. He calls it a knowledge about. But it was not an acquaintance knowledge, if you will. And Howard Thurman uses that. He calls it an acquaintance knowledge. Is a deeper spiritual experience. What you get in schools, in seminaries, in religious schools, is you get dogmatic knowledge. You get knowledge about something, but you don't have a direct experience of it. You're not acquainted with it, if you will. So Jesus was quite acquainted with God. And this is what he's trying to share. So this is what we want to get to. We have an inkling of this depth of God. And what we'd like to do is really experience it. I mean, Bill Wilson, going back to that, he had an inkling about, it wasn't that he didn't believe, just that it wasn't working. His faith wasn't working to him. Then he has the boom. He has this, no, not everybody has to have the white light experience, but he did. And then he had a direct experience, if you will, of the divine. And it changed his life, and such that he began to share. What churches tend to do is they substitute creeds, rituals for this deep religious experience, because as an institution, they can't make it happen. You've got to discipline yourself and practice and be surrendering. And plus, institutional churches can't control your direct encounter with God. And that was one of the problems that the religious leaders had with Jesus. They couldn't control him. They could talk all about their stuff, but it wasn't, and Jesus didn't have any problem with it. It just wasn't, if you would, enough, so to speak. So what we want is not just knowledge about. I went to Catholic schools and I got dogmatic knowledge. I knew about God. If you said, do you believe in God? I says, yeah, I believe in God. And I had experiences with God. I mean, I had Eucharist, I had sacraments, as we call it in my tradition. It wasn't, I had no experiences. I had wonderful Christmases and Holy Weeks and so on and so forth, but it wasn't changing me. That's the difference. You can have experiences, but if it's not changing you, moving you from separation, differences, over against enemies, right and wrong in terms of belief systems, the religious experience isn't deep enough. So I needed acquaintance knowledge. And I began to get acquaintance knowledge. And I think I did have a bit of a white light experiences. So I won't go into that, but my acquaintance knowledge came from this, wherever I got it from, this desire to sit quietly and in stillness in the presence of, just in the presence of, not talking, not asking. And that started early in my life, and it just kept nudging me until finally I gave in, and then gave in a little more and gave in a little more over the years. People say, why are you up here? I guess I'm still giving in. And once you give in, you never return to the same place in the same way. It just changes you. So religious experience moves you into oneness. Dogma always keeps you in separation. This is what we believe. This is what we don't believe. And ever since the Reformation, for sure, we've been about separation and differences, and we'd be willing to kill one another over it. And Howard Thurman was seeing this. I mean, when he went to San Francisco to start his own church, we were in World War II. Christians were killing Christians in Europe. And Japanese were killing white people, and we white people were killing Japanese. And it was such a mess. And we're trying to move on. We're trying not to have that happen again today. So we need the mystical. We need the contemplative, because we need a sense of oneness. Doesn't mean we all agree and are the same. I think Howard Thurman was trying to point this out when he said Jesus is not the only way, if you will. He's not the only way, but he is a way. He's not the only way to God. In other words, it's all going in the same place, but there are different ways to do it. And I don't think Jesus would have any complaints about that. So if we can get to this oneness, and I think the mystical path is the way. I think Howard Thurman had it. There's hope for peace in the world. Yes, what we're doing now is the United Nations, religious. We're trying with politics, with negotiations, with all kinds of ways. We try to punish you a little bit economically if you do something we don't like, so on and so forth. But and a lot of people say religion is useless. I think what they mean is denominational, institutional. But spirituality is not useless. And you learn spirituality out of our religious traditions. So they're not useless. And they all have a mystical path within them. It's just not emphasized enough. I mean, my Catholic Christianity has a contemplative life. It's just not emphasized very much. It certainly isn't emphasized in the schools. And it certainly wasn't emphasized in my education. And I doubt it is even now. But it's there. And so we people have to be talking about it to other people, especially if you're in the denomination, church of some institutional church. You got to be talking about this to people. So as Thurman would point out, faith is that God exists. It's a noun. We have faith in nouns. God is. But mysticism moves God out of being a noun and makes God a verb, action, power, energy. And what is that energy? Love. And it says it right in one of my gospels, John's gospel, right out of John's gospel, which all the Christian denominations share. God is love. Not just for you, your denomination, God's love for all, and not all Christians. All is all. Doesn't matter what your ethnicity is, color of your skin, what your sexuality is, what your economic status is. It's all. All is all. All is not some. So God's love is for all. So it's, and love is a verb. Love is not a noun. If you're loving or you're not. With all this, you're going to begin to see yourself from another point of view. You'll actually begin to see yourself from another point of view. If you read The Cloud of Unknowing, you would see that you will see your shortcomings have gotten in the way. That's one thing. But you're not going to wallow in shame and guilt because of it. That's not going to do you a whole lot of good. It's good to know that. But you'll begin to see yourself from another point of view. You're part of the problem. But also part of that point of view is you'll see yourself from God's point of view, that God knows all your shortcomings that you're just coming to know and recognize your problematicness, if you will. And God loves you. God loves you anyway. And so you will begin to see yourself from God's point of view, and you'll see this tremendous rift between you and God that begins to close as you continue this contemplative practice. So you move from this sense, I'm just a separate sinner, a worthless human being, and so on and so forth. I've been there. And then you move to being the beloved. But I'm beloved anyway. And there's this gap, and I don't like this gap. And as the gap begins to close between you and God, somewhat, although God will still be unknown intellectually, your knowledge about God will always be partial, but your love is what will connect you, the experience. And then you'll begin to love others that are very problematic people who have faults and failings, because you recognize your own and you don't want to let them get in the way. So what you begin to do is to drop things that get in the way of your union, not only with God, but with one another. So you'll drop things that get in the way of your contemplative practice. So if I say to myself, even here in the monastery, much less out there in the what you might call the real world, this world's pretty real to me. But what you find is I said, I need not to let things get in the way of my contemplative practice on a daily basis, and not let things get in the way of a recalling God's presence in my life as I go through the day. That is feeding my mind and my imagination. So I don't want to take on projects in a manner that get in the way of my connection with God. So it's not as if you have to drop certain projects because they're so consuming, but you need to drop an attitude and a way of being when you are in those projects. And that's what begins to change. As I think it says in the scriptures, two people are doing the same thing. One is left and one is taken. On the outside, they're doing the same thing, but on the inside, they're doing it whole different attitudes. And that's what begins to change, I think, in each one of us. You drop the things that get in the way of your ongoing building union with God. So the experience that we begin to have in contemplative prayer, I'm just going to go a few more minutes and we're going to take a break. The experience that we have teaches us to wait and to listen. Oh, isn't that good? So that your ego doesn't get in the way of you the rest of the day. To wait and to listen. Don't just be a person in action. You're sitting for that time each morning or evening, not trying to pay attention to your agenda, your thoughts, and your imagination. Just trying to let it rest, let it be background, and wait, and be in a listening pattern. See what happens. That's a surrender. That's the surrender that Howard Thurman is talking about. This is the key. And when that happens, you'll have a sense of coming home. To know yourself, I think T.S. Eliot says something, you go all over the place and you come back to see yourself in a whole new way. So it's a coming home. There was a manner in which I used to reach out because I had a void in me. Remember, I was talking a few minutes ago about a dis-ease when I was in Chicago, did the big boy thing, the big brother thing. And I'm trying to find a way to fill that void. And only to find out that I was just needed to be learn to be at home in me through a contemplative practice, and the void gets filled. I don't have to go here and have to go there and move all around. So I can live in this monastery now and have a sense of being home. It's not a place that I'm visiting so that I can go back home. Or what I did for so much of my life is I'm here for a little while, then I go there for a little while. So home, it's an interior thing that helps you to feel comfortable in your own self. And then you start getting comfortable around you. And you begin to see all the possibilities around you. Somebody who doesn't live in a monastery, doesn't have any call to be in a monastery, would look at a monastery and say, oh, that's a very strange place. I can visit it, like going on a retreat, but sure, I don't want to live there. Well, it's different with me. So 55 minutes, you must have to go to the bathroom, all you old people like me. And so let's take, where's Chris, David, somebody in there? A break?
I'm here.
Okay.
I took it back over for a little while. Yeah.
You're going to tell people how to support me?
Do I know how to what?
You're going to tell people how to support me so that my next talk isn't from debtor's prison?
Oh, yes. Heaven's sakes. My bad. Yeah. Let me see if we can't do that first. I am so sorry, Father. Let's see. You can support Father Ryan. You can support Father Ryan, first of all, through at Terry-Ryan-25, TERRY-RAN-25. or you can use snail mail, send a check to him, Father Terry Ryan, at St. Benedict's Monastery, 1012 Monastery Road, is spelled Monasty, by the way, for those of you who don't use the word too often. 1012 Monastery Road, Snowmass, Colorado, 81764. Yeah, that's St. Benedict's Monastery, 1012 Monastery Road, Snowmass, Colorado, 81764. And let's see here. Father Ryan has put up, or somebody put up, I thought somebody put that up in the, I guess not. Put that up in chat, and I'm going to try and do a screen with that, Father, while we take a break, okay? How long do you want to take for your break?
No more than 10 minutes. What do you say?
10 minutes, fine with me.
The timer. I'll be back.
It's your meeting. I just work here. Okay.
I'll be back in 10 minutes for sure. May come sooner and we'll start, but no more than 10 minutes. Thank you.
All right.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, this is Liz. I am going to get off. Can you? My screen is funny. I'm going to get off, and if you let me back on, okay?
Oh, that's no problem.
All right, here we go.
Okay. There you go, Liz. While we're on break here, I have shared my screen that shows how to make donations to Father Terry Ryan. Again, the Venmo, if you don't have Venmo, I use Venmo for this and in other groups. It's a very easy way to make a donation. You got to download a little bit of software, but it's no problem. Or give them your credit card, but my experience is extremely secure, and I've never had any problems. Heard of anybody having any problems with the security on Venmo. Anyhow, Venmo, which is an online app you can use to make donations to different groups. His Venmo address is Terry, Terry hyphen Ryan, Ryan hyphen 25. Or again, you can mail donations to Father Terry Ryan, Terry Ryan at St. Benedict's Monastery, Benedic apostrophe Monastery, Monastery, 1012 1012 Monastery Road, Colorado, um, 8164. Oh, I don't know why this morning I want to call it Colorado instead of Colorado, but and I also don't know why I decided I need to do entr'acte stand up, but I'm not very good.
I forget I have earbuds.
Okay, can you hear me now, Father?
Yeah, now I'm fine.
Okay, all right. I think it's been a good 10 minutes. Can you see the screen?
I see the screen that says donations to Father Terry Ryan.
Right, okay. The information is all correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Because and I read it out a couple of times during the break, so I'll
We're
just leave it
fine.
up, and whenever you're ready to go, I'll leave it up for like another 5 minutes or so while you're talking, then I'll take it down.
Okay, I can't see anything but that. I can
Yeah, well,
talk
that's the way it's supposed to. That's the way it's supposed to be.
Now, during the talk, I never was the main screen. I always was one of the little boxes.
What? That's because you had. That's because you had yourself on gallery view and speaker view.
But everybody else saw it differently.
Yeah, it depends. If people put you on people, it's this each individual to make
All
you the
right.
whole screen has to put their computer on speaker view.
Okay. All right. I'm going to change mine when we get back there.
Okay, all right. But I assumed that you wanted me to leave this up for just a few more minutes while you start talking, because may be out of the room and they hear you talk and they'll come back in
Is
and
the
be
10
able to get
minutes
the
up yet?
information. I'm sorry?
Is the 10 minutes up?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Well, you can take it off then now. It's fine.
Okay,
I'll get back on.
we'll take it down. And I'll
Okay.
remind everybody, if you want to have your screen just show Father Terry else, what you need to do is you need to click, there should be a view button someplace on your screen. On most computers, it's in the upper right-hand corner.
Yeah, I got it. I got it on speaker.
Yeah, and if you click that, if you click speaker, then Father Ryan will go full screen. You don't have to look at all the little boxes. Some people it's someplace else, but typically it's the upper right-hand. With that, I'm going to shut up and go away.
But when
See?
I talk,
Father Ryan,
I'm not the main screen.
when you talk, you should be the main screen.
No, I have gallery view.
You want
Uh,
speaker view.
I do. What's full screen? No, that's no good. I mean, now I can't find it again.
Father Terry, tap gallery and it'll change automatically.
Well, now I've got Mary Jane is the main thing. I can't even find me anywhere.
Uh-oh. Well.
That is because Mary Jane is the last person who spoke.
Choose virtual
You need to-
background. Choose video settings. What is it?
When you speak, you show up in the full screen.
I do?
Yeah.
Okay, because right now when I'm seeing you, okay, well, I don't know. I don't want to mess it. I don't want to mess it up right now, but
In the upper left corner, there's a full screen, just that little square. If you do that, you'll probably have you all big. Way up in the upper left corner, I had that.
no, up in my left corner, I have recording or a bunch
Mhm.
of other things, but none of it is what I'm looking for.
That's
Um,
what I was trying to explain. Let me run through it again real quickly. It varies according to your computer. Some people it's in the upper left-hand corner. Some people it's right-hand corner. Some people it's actually at the bottom of the screen. If you are on an iPhone, you've got to do a right swipe, but you will someplace you will find a little button that says View, and it has like a bunch of little boxes next to it. And if you click on View, and then you click on Speaker View, whoever is talking fills up the entire screen.
Let me try this. I'm just messing around now. Whoops, I just disappeared. There I am. All right, we got to get back to it. I'll have to figure this out some other time, but as long as it's working for everybody else.
It's working. Very.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, let's not mess with anymore. All right.
And mute
we're
everybody.
What?
I'm going to mute everybody except now, Father, so there's no disturbance. Okay?
Okay. Now we're back. Before we go into our 20-minute sit and then some Q&A, two things I want you to take away with you from Howard Thurman that I think is very unique to him. The first thing is our obsession with certainty. It's not that we can't have certainty. It's not that certainty is a bad thing. We have certainty in our faiths, I'm sure. It's our obsession with it. We get so obsessed with certainty, and I think it comes out of fear, that we begin to divide and separate, segment and judge all others who do not agree with our way. And it can be political, it can be sexual, it can be religious, it can be economic. It's an obsession with certainty. Not only that sometimes people say, well, we're the best, which means others can be good, but our obsession with certainty is such that we got it all, whatever our all is, and everybody else is dead wrong. And being dead wouldn't be a bad thing. So we have to keep that in mind. And it might even have something to do with the killing of one another, is our obsession with certainty. Whatever we are is right. And if you're not what we are, you have no right. So that's one thing. The other thing I'd like you to take with you is dogma is knowledge about, not acquaintance with. And what the mystical path is to give us acquaintance with, an intimate friendship, not just knowing about. And what you'll find out, and the cloud of unknowing will tell you this, is that the more intimate the relationship, the less you really know about. And the less intimate the relationship is, the more you think you know about. So people can talk all about God if they want with a lot of certainty. And I will guarantee you they do not have all that deep a spiritual life. So keep those two things in mind, because Howard Thurman thinks those are the things that are going to begin to break up this way we have of segregation in so many forms. Now we're going to continue talking about him. Next month, on the third Saturday, no, not Thursday, next month on the first Saturday, excuse me, I'm getting all wrong. The first Saturday of May, we're going to continue talking about him. Hopefully at 9 a.m. my time and not 8:30, but we'll see. I can adjust. So now, is Mary Kendall with us? She's got the gong. She's not.
Actually, no, Father. It's
Oh.
today we had to change things. Mary Jane and Michael have got the gong.
Oh, okay. All right. So,
Okay. Mary Jane and Michael, are you ready to go?
Yep.
Okay. So I guess whenever you're ready to start, and once we hear the gong, we can go into
we're going to
silent
do a
contemplation.
20 minutes. And if you have no idea what to do, I'll give you a little suggestion, is to get a comfortable position. I suggest you close your eyes so you're not thinking about all the things that you see. And then just notice your breathing, a couple of breaths, and then just let go of your thoughts, your feelings, whatever you're imagining. Don't pay attention to them, in other words. And if you find yourself paying attention to them, just notice your breathing again. And we'll sit for 20 minutes, and that'll be our meditation. So I'm going on mute. Mary Jane, take over. Okay. Are we back? Oops, I guess we are.
I guess we are now.
All right. Well, welcome back, everybody. And now, why don't we go into some Q&A?
Well, you want to do questions now?
Yes.
Very good. Very good.
You
Father
can-
Terry,
Yes.
I have a question.
Yes.
Is there much I don't know much about Howard Thurman. I haven't read him or anything, but is there any documentation, or does he talk at all about the difficulties he had breaking through the barriers or resistance? Is there like an autobiography of him or something where he talks about his struggles with trying to bring people together?
He has 3 books, and you can just look up Précis on each one to see which one actually had. One is Jesus and the Disinherited is one book. Another is called The Inward Journey. And another is Deep is the Hunger. But I'm going to tell you about another one, which is kind of a summary. And that's the Orbis Press book on the essential writings. He wasn't, what I think helped Howard to get around or through or stay outside of a lot of harassment was he didn't live his adult life in the South. He didn't live it in Dayton, Florida, and he didn't live it in Georgia. He lived it in one of the most liberal communities around, San Francisco, California, where once he went back out there in 1965, I don't think he left until he died in 1981, I believe. So that was one thing. And he was in Boston College, which is, New England. And there's always going to be problems for everybody in terms of driving well black, walking well black, eating well black, that everybody can have. But he didn't live in a world where that would be so explicit. I mean, he was an academic when he was teaching it. He was teaching at either black universities or going to Boston College or running his own church in San Francisco. And so I think that because he was such a good preacher, he was able to attract people to his thinking, his expansive way of thinking. He only worked in that small Baptist church in Ohio for a couple of years.
It's interesting that he had to leave his native land, and like Jesus did, said that he was uncomfortable in his own hometown preaching there,
Well,
he had to go out.
Well, yeah. Florida, it was and may still be a very racist place. And he would have just had innumerable problems. And he couldn't get a decent education there. Once he got through the all-black high school that helped him, I think that was one of the key elements that he was able to get into this. He was smart, and he was given the vision to get ahead. Don't let your environment hold you back. Don't let it be the norm. And so he got out of there after high school and didn't spend a whole lot of time back there. But he did learn about segregation, not only from his old upbringing, but he had his grandma as well, who had been a slave before the Civil War, and who had to live through all the Reconstruction and the lack of Reconstruction, and the bitterness of the white South, to include their Christianity. They would think themselves very Christian people. But from his perspective, it didn't really include him. So I think he was able to have the experience, which gave him the sense of separation, narrow-mindedness, and so on. And yet he was able to stay outside of having to put up with its worst by not living where he had grown up, which was Dayton, Florida. I said Daytona, Florida.
Daytona Beach.
Daytona, Florida. Well, Daytona Beach is the beach. You can be sure not a lot of black people live there. Daytona is, more inland where it's hotter.
I have a question.
Yes.
Did he accept the dogma of the incarnation, the virgin birth, and so on?
Well, he didn't have a problem with Christianity. He just wanted to say that you didn't have to follow each of those dogmatic things. What he was trying to get people to do is follow Jesus. Now, you might ask yourself, how much did Jesus talk about the virgin birth? How much did Jesus talk about the Assumption, the Immaculate Conception? If I recall, not at all. Matter of fact, didn't talk about his family much at all. He said, who is my father and my mother, my brother and my sister? And he said, those who follow me, the way I'm living and what I'm talking about. So, I mean, he didn't have a dogma, if you will, of institutional religion. So Howard was trying to emphasize Jesus, and Howard studied scripture. He didn't have a degree in theology, if you will, or a postgraduate degree in theological stuff, which is what you're bringing up. So my question would be, how much is any of that, those issues, those Marian issues, have to do with the depth of your relationship with God and your breaking out of cultural boundaries? For instance, if you were to pick up in whatever country you're in, let's say, you were to pick up a picture of the Virgin Mary, what color would she be? And what would she look like? What color were her eyes? What color's her hair? And so on and so forth. And what you'll often find is they look exactly like you. And that's why you have that picture. And I would suspect that Jesus was probably not very tall. And he probably had a big nose. And he probably looked like every other, and maybe had big lips. He probably looked like every other Jew in Palestine. Because remember, they were very much tribal. You didn't go outside of Judaism to marry a non-Jew. So you look very Jewish, if you will. And so that's just the way we are. We tend to color our faith with our color, our culture, our ethnicity. And we really can't put up with a difference. We have just very big problems with that. And so that's what I think Howard was trying to bring out when he started his own church. And he had to start his own church in San Francisco because couldn't find one like that. I mean, just everywhere he went, even in his own Baptist circles. So
We have another question over here.
Yeah,
I'm waiting.
yeah, this is Mike. This is an observation about you, Terry, and it's related to a question. When I was growing up in high school and college, I ran track. And when we were involved in track back in the 1960s, there was a phenomenon we always talked about, which was called the loneliness of the long distance runner. It was a book and it became a movie. And it was a phenomenon, but I heard it in so many track teams. So many people talked about that, and also my observations that there was validity to the idea that there was a discomfort or a phenomenon that was related to being a long distance runner. And so the question I have for you is, number one, is whether that seemed to be valid for yourself, and also did that move you in a spiritual direction over time?
No,
Well-
I don't think my running made me lonely. I think I was lonely and I ran.
Okay.
Because one of the things you do when you run long distances is you end up often running by yourself because you can't find anybody else who wants to run a long distance with you.
Right.
We didn't have running clubs back then. People didn't run after they finished school because it just wasn't done. So I think I wouldn't mix my running with my loneliness. If anything, I think running took it away. I didn't experience loneliness. I was alone, but there's a difference. You move into sort of a solitude, which is not loneliness. And still now, when I'm fit, I mean, when you're not fit, you don't enjoy running because you're just getting back into it. It's debilitating. It's not fun at all. But once you're fit and you have the right equipment, the right clothes, the right shoes, I find running to be very much can be solitude. And now with running groups, of which I don't belong in the monastery, but with running groups, it can become very social. But there's nothing like a good run by yourself because there's nobody else out there but you. And you're sort of challenging yourself or you're enjoying yourself. And I think at my age, I try to enjoy it rather than to say, let's get better and better so we can race. I'm not into racing anymore. But I think if I recall the movie, I don't know, it was either England or Ireland that it took place. And that guy had his issues and he ran. So he was already lonely and he was a long distance runner. And probably the long distance running helped him to deal with his debilitating loneliness. But I would suggest that instead of beating yourself with long distance running, you sit and do something like centering prayer, which or some sort of meditation, which will help. And then I think you'll enjoy your running even better. Or you'll decide, no, I'm not going to do that kind of stuff.
Father Terry, I have a question around Howard Thurman's interaction with Martin Luther King, his contemporary. Did either one of them influence each other as contemporary preachers?
Well, yes. I think just because of their charisms, charisms again, their charismatic ways and what they were trying to do was an influence to one another. I think that Howard pursued it more in trying to teach others on a university level, trying to expand an idea through university training as opposed to Martin Luther King Jr. trying to do it with the nonviolent actions, but they both believed in nonviolence. As I mentioned, he had met Gandhi, and he didn't go to see Gandhi just to say hi. There was something about that nonviolence, and I think I'll talk about that a little bit more next time. But I think what they both shared in terms of nonviolence is nonviolence is not so much a nonviolence action is not so much so that you get something, such as to eat at the lunch counter, as it is to change the other person. Your actions are trying to influence the other person to take another look at themselves and see you the action. A lot of people get upset with nonviolence because they say, well, it didn't get you what you wanted. Was it Students for Nonviolent, what is it called, SNAP? What came after Martin Luther King were young men with the afros and the clothes and maybe the guns, and said, we don't want to live with you. And you come after us and we're going to shoot you. And that was a response. But I think what Howard and Martin Luther had in mind in the nonviolence was, it was an act of love, hoping that the other person would take a second look at themselves as to why they're acting the way that they're acting toward you, who isn't doing anything to hurt them. Might make them look at why do they see you so differently, and so on and so forth. So I think that was the key to, and is the key to nonviolent action. And a lot of people give up nonviolent action because they don't get what they want. And they said, now, so we're going to go to violent action to get what we want. So I think that's the way that they each supported one another. Although Howard would tend to push it in terms of teaching and preaching.
Father Terry, can I chime in a minute?
Sure.
I did just read Jesus and the Disinherited. And from what I have understood from history, that book was highly influential in the development of the civil rights movements in the 60s, 50s and 60s. And it could be called the Bible of the nonviolent activism of the 60s. And it's very beautifully written. The first chapter in particular is very good. And it's a short book. So I would suggest anybody who wants to know about what that influence was to read that book. That's my understanding anyway.
Yeah. Let's see if anybody else has other questions on this as I'm thinking myself about this. The community does not have to be about being the same. I think we don't have to be the same to be a community. What we're looking for is some harmony that transcends diversity. So we're different colors, we're different beliefs, we're different cultures. And somebody says, okay, if you're going to come to the United States, you have to be just like the early Puritans. You just have to be a capitalist, and so on and so forth. What you're trying to find out is not differences that divide us, but differences that help us to also be in harmony. And I don't think you're going to get that without a spiritual practice. And I think the spiritual practice starts out with being in harmony with yourself, which I think is what Howard Thurman is talking about. You got to be in harmony with yourself. So the nonviolent action is it's not to make us all the same, but to help you to look more deeply into yourself. You don't want a community gone off half cockeyed is a community into power, white power, black power, violence. It's just not going to work. So you're trying to find a way to help others to look more deeply into themselves. And I think diversity can be very rich if each of us are in some transcendent harmony with ourselves. And then we're going to see how diversity works. And the trouble is, we're not in harmony with ourselves, and we call ourselves Christian, for instance. And we don't like a lot of people who aren't like us. We're frightened. So I think you have to be in harmony with yourself. It's really all an interior job. I think that you make people inhuman when you segregate them, because it's like black power doesn't matter. I mean, they'll ask some of this whole thing about black power or not black lives. Black lives matter. Not a lot of white people, black lives don't matter at all. Let's face it, they just don't. You make people not almost non-people. So I think you really got to work on your insides. And I think Howard Thurman really saw this. He saw the violence of what religion can be when you just don't have enough inside work. And I think you're going to get a lot of that if you read Jesus and the Disinherited. You feel very disinherited when you're treated as a non-person, when you're treated as non-inclusive. You're very disinherited. And Jesus was trying to make people feel like you're all God's children, which means you inherit. But anything else? Well, we've gone 2 hours, and what we're going to do is come back again next month on the first Saturday of May, which, if I can just pick up my calendar,
I believe
should
it's
be,
the first.
what is it?
The first.
Oh, it's the 1st of May? May Day?
May Day.
Yes.
May Day is the feast of St. Joseph. I think it's the feast of St. Joseph the Worker, because it had something to do with communism and so on and so forth. But that's another thing. So it's going to be the 1st of May. Meanwhile, if you're interested in one of the problems people had with COVID, and I think if Chris has taken over, he may put it up there someplace, because I sent him a flyer. What I'm going to do on the 3rd Saturday of this month, which I think is the 17th, we're going to do it out of Snowmass. And Chris will tell you how to find that, or I'll tell Ed Miller. What I'm going to start looking at the 3rd Saturday, and I think the 4th, but the 3rd Saturday, which is April 17th at 9 a.m. my time, 11 SOS time, is Thoreau. Remember Walden Pond? Thoreau, and he chose to be alone. Why? Versus COVID. So it's COVID versus Thoreau. In COVID, a lot of people were forced to be alone, and it made them very angry, upset, nervous, scared, and so on and so forth. He chose to be alone. And so what I'm going to start looking at is, what did COVID offer us that we missed. And I'm going to use Thoreau's life and his teachings to do that. So that's the 17th of April. Then we'll back to Howard Thurman. So 2 T's, Thoreau, Thurman, back to Howard Thurman, the May 1. Okay. Oh, okay.
Yep.
All right. So we'll just leave now, and I will see you the 17th or the 1st of May, whichever works. Okay. And of course, this is being recorded, and it will be placed, I think David said where it is. Or if he hasn't, it's going to be placed on snowmassbookstore.com. And I think it comes out as a YouTube, and he tells you exactly how to find that YouTube. So if you didn't attend, you can check it that way. Okay. So we'll see you all later. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Father Terry.
Thanks, Father Terry.
Thank you. Happy Easter.
Happy Easter tomorrow. Yes.
Yeah.
Happy Easter, everybody.
Happy Easter.
Happy Easter.
I'm not allowed to be on video, so.
Happy Easter, Terry.
Bye-bye.